She had nothing but a dying colt and a letter, until a quiet cowboy taught her to love again. The wind dragged dust across the open plain, painting the horizon in shades of rust and grit. The road was quiet, save for the soft, uneven steps of a girl and the faltering hooves of a colt beside her. She walked with her head down, her hair tangled, her dress torn in too many places to count. Her boots were caked in dry mud, soles nearly worn through. One hand held a length of rope tied gently to the colt's neck. The other clutched a folded piece of paper, stained at the edges with old blood. The colt, no older than half a year, limped beside her, its flank wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Each step was a struggle, and every breath came shallow and quick. But the girl did not slow, and the colt, somehow, kept following. From the south a mule rider approached, an old man named Mac, his hat askew and his face weathered and weathered. He slowed down when he saw them, disbelief etched on his haggard features. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, pulling up beside her. "What in hell are you dragging through dust and fire, girl?" She stopped but didn't look at him. Her voice was hoarse, dry. "What does it look like?" The old man eyed the colt, the blood, the bandages. Then he saw the letter pressed tight against her chest. "You got a half-dead colt and a letter," he said slowly. She finally turned her head. Her eyes were sharp and gray, but heavy. "That's all it takes to make men want me dead." He stared for a moment longer. "You got a name?" "Ella." She said it like she had almost forgotten it was hers. The mule shifted beneath him. "Where you headed?" "Nowhere," she answered, "just away." He considered that, then asked, "What's in the letter?" Ella looked down. The paper was creased, worn, blood-marked, but carefully kept dry. "Truth," she said. "The kind that makes cowards dangerous." He exhaled through his nose. "That letter got anything to do with the land folks are whispering about?" "Burned-out ranch, a mare shot down in cold blood." Ella didn't answer. But the memories rose anyway. The smell of fire, her brother Jacob standing in front of the barn with a shotgun, yelling that they'd have to go through him. The men laughing. The sound of a rifle, sharp and cruel, as they dropped the mare, the colt's mother, with a bullet between the eyes. Ella screaming as Jacob tackled one of them, then the fists, the boots, and finally the thud of silence when his body hit the porch. He had pressed the letter into her hand while choking on blood. "Run," he had said. "Run and don't let them bury this with me." And she had run. She looked at the colt now, its legs shaking. "He followed me when his mother dropped. I didn't call him. He just came." The old man rubbed his chin. "And you've been walking since?" Ella nodded. "Hiding during the day. Moving at night. You're lucky you're still standing." "No," she said. "I'm just not done yet." As they neared the outpost on the ridge, the colt stumbled. It tried to rise, hooves scraping the hardpan, then collapsed fully onto its side. "No," Ella cried. She dropped to her knees beside it, wrapping her arms around its neck. Its body was hot, panting, heart racing. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please. Don't leave me too." The old man dismounted and crouched beside her. "You need help. That colt needs a miracle." Ella pressed her forehead against the colt's mane. "Then find someone who still believes in them." Her voice cracked, but no tears fell. The colt let out a low, pained sound, still breathing, but barely. Ella stroked its head, over and over. "You're all I've got, all that's left." The outpost stood silent beyond the hill. Smoke rose from a chimney. Somewhere inside, warmth waited. But Ella held on. In the dust, in the blood, in the fading breath of a colt who had followed her through fire. And she whispered one last time, "You don't get to die. Not yet. Not while I'm still standing." The outpost yard sat still under the late sun, dust curling through the posts of the split rail fence. A few men played cards beneath a canvas shade, and the clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoed faintly from behind the barn. Ella didn't notice any of it. Her focus remained on the colt, whose breathing had grown shallower. She pressed her hand to its neck, eyes darting across the yard for anyone who might help. Most folks watched from a distance, unsure what to make of a girl dressed in ash and blood, clinging to a dying animal like it was a child. Then boots stepped close, heavy, purposeful. A man crouched beside her, not young, not old, quiet. He unrolled a thick wool blanket, and without saying a word, draped it over the colt's body. The animal flinched, then stilled. He placed one hand gently on its flank, the other rubbing slow circles along its belly. Ella blinked, startled by the gentleness. The man said nothing. Mac approached, mule in tow. He looked from the girl to the man. "Well, hell," he muttered. "Didn't think I'd see you in town this side of winter." The man didn't look up. Needed salt. Mac folded his arms. "You know this girl?" No. Then why? The man's voice stayed low, steady. You see someone hold a dying thing that tight and not cry. That's someone who's already lost too much. Mac gave a grunt. Fair point. Ella glanced at the stranger, tall, sun-worn skin, sleeves rolled up, eyes the color of dry stone. He hadn't even looked at her yet. All his focus remained on the Colt. He's burning up, the man said. I know, Ella whispered. He'll need water, cool shade, time. I don't have time. Now he looked at her, one glance, long and level. You do now. He stood, whistled once. A small cart with a mule hitched to it sat nearby, mostly empty, except for a coil of rope and a sack of flour. He stepped to the cart, grabbed 2 planks, and laid them on the ground like a ramp. Then he returned, reached under the Colt's body, and lifted it with a strength that looked effortless. Ella moved to help, but he shook his head. I've got him. Carefully he laid the Colt in the bed of the cart, cushioning it with the blanket and a grain sack folded twice over. He walked to the fence, broke off a length of thin wood, then wedged it under the Colt's neck, stabilizing its head so it wouldn't bounce as the cart moved. Ella stood watching, stunned. He turned to her. You coming? She hesitated. Where? My ranch, 10 miles out. It's quiet. There's water. She looked down at the Colt, then back at him. Why would you help me? He shrugged once. Someone ought to. Mac gave a soft chuckle behind them. That's Sam Whitaker for you. Doesn't say much, but when he does, it usually sticks. Ella climbed into the cart, settling next to the Colt. Sam took the reins without another word and clicked his tongue. The mule started forward, hooves tapping against the hard-packed earth. They rode in silence. The Colt stirred once, whimpering. Ella adjusted the blanket around it. Sam didn't speak, but he reached back and pulled the brim of his hat lower, blocking the sun from both their faces. She watched him from the corner of her eye. His shirt was patched, hands worn, but everything about him felt anchored, like a tree that had survived more than a few storms and stopped trying to tell the wind what to do. As they crossed the ridge, she looked down at the plank still cradling the Colt's neck. She whispered, barely audible, thank you. He didn't turn, didn't nod, just kept the cart moving forward, but his hand tightened slightly on the reins, and that was enough. Sam's ranch was modest, a single-story cabin with a slanted porch, a worn barn out back, and fields that rolled gently into a line of distant hills. There was no white picket fence, no flowers on the windowsills, but it was clean, quiet, and solid. A place built not for show, but for survival. He led the mule around back, helped Ella down from the cart without a word, and then lifted the Colt into his arms again. The barn smelled of cedar shavings and dust. Sam opened the largest stall, the only one with fresh hay and a reinforced gate, and laid the Colt inside. He propped its legs gently, then knelt beside it, inspecting the wound with steady hands. Ella hovered at the door, hesitant. That stall. It looks like it's for a prize horse. Sam didn't look up. It is. He stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and moved to a shelf where he kept jars of dried herbs. He selected 2, ground them in a mortar, then boiled water on a cast-iron stove just outside the barn door. Once the mixture cooled, he poured it into his hands and returned to the stall. With fingers calloused from years of rope and leather, Sam pressed the salve into the Colt's wound, slow and precise, never flinching at the blood. Ella couldn't look away. That night he showed her to a small room off the kitchen, plain, but with clean sheets and a quilt that smelled of sage. She didn't speak much, just thanked him and closed the door softly. Hours passed. She lay awake, the scent of smoke still clinging to her hair. No matter how many times she had scrubbed her scalp in the stream, she could still feel the fire in her skin. She curled into herself and tried to cry, but the tears had grown tired. What came instead was silence, heavy, hollow. A crash echoed from the kitchen. Sam looked up from the chair by the fire where he had been mending a strap. Ella stood near the sink, shards of a ceramic bowl at her feet. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to, it slipped. I'm not used to American dishes. Sam rose slowly, crossed the room, crouched down, and began picking up the pieces. It's just a bowl, he said. I'll pay for it, she whispered. He looked up at her. You carried a Colt through ash and heat. You didn't drop him. That's a strong enough hand for any plate in this house. Ella stared at him, something soft and strange tightening in her chest. She nodded, lips pressed tight. They cleaned in silence. Later by the fire, she sat across from him, fingers tangled in the hem of her sleeve. The flicker of the flames cast long shadows, and for the first time she let her voice break. "My brother, Jacob," she said. "He was the one who wouldn't give in. The land was in his name. They said we could keep the house if we just handed over the deed quietly." He told them no. Told them justice needed names. Sam didn't interrupt. He wrote everything down: who paid off the sheriff, who torched the barn, who shot the mayor. She pulled the blood-stained letter from her coat and laid it on the table between them. "He gave me this with his last breath," she said. "He told me to run, and not to let it end with silence." Her voice caught. "It's not just a piece of paper. It's the last thing in the world that says I was worth protecting." Sam leaned back, watching her. The firelight glinted off his cheek, casting half his face in gold. "You were," he said simply. And for the first time since she ran from smoke and bullets, Ella believed it might be true. The sun hung low over the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. The air was thick with the smell of turned earth, as Sam worked the garden behind the barn, shovel rising and falling in rhythm. He wiped his brow, the straw had pulled low over his eyes, when the sudden crunch of hooves shattered the quiet. 3 riders came fast down the ridge. Ella was at the water trough filling a pail for the Colt when she heard them. Her spine stiffened. She knew the shape of those shoulders, the sneer in the voice before a word even left his mouth. "Well, well. Look what the smoke dragged in." She turned slowly. There they were, the same men who had torched her family's land. Their boots too clean for honest work. Their horses snorting and restless. One of them, the one with the silver-buckled vest, dismounted and pulled a folded paper from his coat. "We've come to collect what's rightfully under dispute," he said, waving the document. "Dispute?" Ella asked, voice steady despite the thudding in her chest. "This Colt," he said, nodding toward the barn, "was bred on your family's land, which is no longer legally in your possession. We've got papers. And that letter your brother left you? We're going to need that too. You're harboring evidence of slander and conspiracy. Not smart." Another man, broad-shouldered and eager-looking, leaned forward in the saddle. "Hand 'em both over, and maybe you'll sleep better tonight." The first one smiled. "Refuse, and you might not sleep at all." Ella didn't move. She gripped the pail tighter, pulse pounding in her ears. From behind the barn came the steady rhythm of boots on dirt. Sam appeared, shirt damp from work, hands still covered in soil. He looked at the scene, 3 men, one holding paper, the others holding nothing but malice, and said nothing at first. The leader turned to him. "This your place?" Sam nodded once. "You know who you're sheltering?" "I do." The man squinted. "You her husband?" Sam took a step forward, slow but firm, and his voice dropped into gravel. "I'm the man who owns this land. Every inch of it. Which means you and your horses are 1 step from trespassing." The leader's lip curled. "This ain't your fight, cowboy." Sam's gaze hardened. "She's here. The Colt's here. And both of them, they're staying." That made the third man laugh. "You think this is over a horse?" "No," Sam said. "It's over someone who won't be run off again." The leader narrowed his eyes. "You don't want this trouble." Sam's jaw tightened. "You're on my land. You threaten her again, I bury your threat in this dirt and plant tomatoes on top of it." Silence fell like a hammer. Even the horses shifted uneasily. Then he added, quieter but deadlier, "And she belongs here. This place, this ranch, it's hers now too." The men exchanged glances. The leader folded the paper back into his coat, his mouth thin with fury. "This ain't done," he snapped. "We'll be back. And next time we won't be talking." Sam took 1 slow step forward. "Then bring more than paper." They turned their horses. Dust rose behind them as they galloped away. Ella stood frozen, one hand clenched around the handle of the pail, the other resting on her thigh. She didn't look at Sam right away. He walked past her, back toward the garden, as if nothing had happened. "Why did you say that?" she finally asked, her voice barely above the wind. He stopped, turned halfway. "Say what?" "That I belong here." He met her eyes, calm and unwavering. "Because you do." Her throat tightened. She stepped closer, words tumbling out. No one's ever said that. Not even before they burned it down. They said I was lucky to be allowed on the land." "You don't need permission to belong," Sam said. She stared at him a long moment, and when she finally spoke again, it came out like breath too heavy to hold. "You didn't just stand up for me. You made this home. Even for someone like me." Sam didn't smile. He just nodded, turned back to the garden, and returned to planting, like protecting her was just another part of tending the soil. The men were gone, but their threats lingered like smoke in the rafters, impossible to catch, but always there, settling into the corners of the night. That evening the house felt quieter than usual, and not in a peaceful way. The silence was tight, watchful. Ella lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the sheets pulled high to her chin though the air was warm and still. Her body ached from days of walking, from the impact of fear, from holding too much in too long. But her mind refused to rest. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of timber in the wind, made her flinch. The flicker of shadows beyond the curtain sent her heart skipping, not because she thought they'd come back, but because she knew they could. And the worst part was how it all looked so ordinary. The ranch, the fields, the barn that still smoldered faintly at its edge, it all stood as if nothing had happened, as if violence hadn't passed through like a storm without warning. In the room across the hall, Sam slept the way he always did, silent, still, as though confrontation had passed through him like wind through stone. He didn't stir. He didn't talk in his sleep. He simply existed, a constant presence beneath the weight of night. Ella wanted to be angry at how calm he seemed, but she couldn't be. There was something in his stillness that didn't feel like detachment. It felt like steadiness, like someone holding a wall up for someone else to lean against. By first light he was already outside splitting wood behind the barn. The thud of the axe was rhythmic, clean, grounding. By midday he was crouched beside the Colt, unwrapping the old dressing and carefully applying new herbs to the wound. He didn't flinch when the Colt flinched. He didn't speak to the animal. He just worked. Later that evening, he was at the orchard fence, replacing a rail that had splintered. The sleeve of his shirt was rolled up, his bandaged shoulder darkened with sweat. He never said a word about the men. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't try to make sense of what had happened. He simply kept going. Ella watched him from the kitchen window, watched the way his back curved into every task without complaint. Not with confusion, but with something else, something heavier than admiration. A quiet kind of respect. There was a strength in Sam that wasn't loud or theatrical. It was the kind of strength you didn't notice until everything around you started to fall apart, and he was still standing. That afternoon, as the sky turned amber and the wind shifted with the scent of coming rain, she passed the front window and stopped short. The piano stood just beneath the sill. She stared at it for a moment, disoriented. It had been in the barn, she was sure of it, shoved behind crates, legs warped, keys cracked and dusty. She had seen it and dismissed it as nothing but a relic too broken to be revived. But now, it stood clean. The wood had been sanded smooth, the surface oiled. One leg still leaned slightly, but someone had propped it with a hand-carved brace. The missing key, the one she remembered, had been replaced with a small, pale strip of oak, not polished, but lovingly shaped. She pressed a single key. The sound that came was soft, a little hesitant, but it sang. She did not need to ask who had done it. She already knew. That evening she lit a candle, pulled out a pencil and a few pages of sheet music, and began to write. The melody came slow, like something returning after a long absence. She didn't push it. She let it come on its own terms, soft chords that flickered like firelight, rising only when they needed to, never demanding attention. She named it Home without asking. The next night she played it. Sam sat in his usual chair near the hearth, boots off, one arm draped over the back, his eyes closed, not sleeping, just listening. He didn't say anything when she finished, but when she looked at him, his gaze told her everything. Later, as she passed the piano, she saw it. A small glass jar sat on the lid, filled with wildflowers, soft blue, pale yellow, white. The kind that had once grown wild behind her childhood home. The kind she used to braid into her hair before fire took the fields. There was no note, no message, just the flowers, and the silence between them. Ella reached out and touched the petals, her fingers trembling just slightly, and for the first time in many nights she smiled, not from joy, but from something more sacred. Belonging. The wind howled louder than usual that night, stirring the dry brush and rattling the shutters. There was no moon, just darkness, thick and silent, pressing against the windows like something waiting to breathe. Ella couldn't sleep, neither could Sam. He sat by the door with his rifle across his lap, boots still on, eyes scanning the shadows outside. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea long gone cold. Neither said it, but both felt it. The air had changed. And then came the sound. Hooves, several. They moved like thunder, sudden and deliberate, then stopped just beyond the gate. A moment later, flames erupted from the barn. The sky lit orange. Sam was on his feet instantly. "Stay inside," he barked, already moving. "No," Ella started, but he was out the door. She ran after him anyway. Figures moved in the dark. 3 men, faces half-covered, guns drawn. One aimed at the house. The other two walked toward Sam. "This ain't a visit," one shouted. "She's coming with us. There's questions need answering, that letter, that land, that lie of a Colt." Sam raised his rifle. "She's not going anywhere," he said. A shot rang out. Sam ducked, rolled behind the water trough, fired back once, then again. Ella could barely breathe. Fire licked up the barn's roof. The Colt screamed inside. Sam sprinted toward the barn, bullets slicing through the air. He kicked the stall open, yanked the Colt's halter, and let it out, shielding its body with his own. Another shot, this one caught him in the shoulder. "Sam," Ella cried, running to him. He stumbled but kept going, dragging the Colt toward the far fence. "Get him to cover," he growled through clenched teeth. A second shot whizzed by and shattered the corner post. Suddenly, more gunfire cracked from the ridge, Mac's voice shouting, "That's enough." And from behind the trees came the townsfolk, a few farmers, even the storekeeper, rifles raised, eyes hard. The attackers turned tail and ran, disappearing into the dark as fast as they had come. The fire raged, but the worst was over. Ella dropped beside Sam, who had collapsed into the dirt. Blood seeped through his shirt, soaking into the earth. "No, no, no, stay with me," she whispered, pressing her hands to his wound. He looked up at her, breathing hard, jaw clenched in pain. "I don't know how to say it," he said hoarsely. "Never did." "Don't try," she begged, tears slipping free. "Just stay alive." But he reached up and gripped her hand, firm even through the pain. "If I die here," he whispered, "at least it's for something. Someone I didn't want to lose." Ella's heart shattered. "You won't," she said. "You hear me? I won't let you. Not after you gave me a reason to keep breathing." She cradled him in her arms, firelight flickering across their faces, smoke curling toward the stars. The Colt stood nearby, trembling but alive. So was Sam. Barely, but alive. And she wasn't letting go. The days that followed passed slowly, stitched together by small labors and long silences. Sam healed without complaint. He refused to lie idle longer than absolutely necessary, even when every movement tugged at the wound beneath his shoulder. His bandage often grew damp with sweat before noon, but he never slowed. If the pain ever showed, it was only in the way he paused a second longer before lifting a beam or the slight hitch in his breath as he bent to pick up a tool. He never spoke of the fire, never mentioned the gunshots or how close the bullet had come to taking more than just flesh. He didn't relive the chaos or dwell on what had nearly been lost. Instead, he rebuilt. With the same quiet focus he used to mend fences and train horses, he began to restore what had been broken. He replaced the barn's charred planks, measuring each one twice before hammering it into place. He repaired the latch on the Colt's stall. He cleared the blackened brush from the edge of the garden and planted new seeds without saying a word about it. He even redug the irrigation trench behind the orchard, the one they didn't strictly need, as if making something flow again was his own way of bringing the world back into balance. Ella watched him, sometimes through the window, sometimes from beneath the eaves of the porch with a cup of tea gone cold in her hands. She never offered to help, and he never asked. But he didn't stop her from being near, either. And in that small, unspoken allowance, she found something steadier than kindness, permission to stay. His silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like presence, a kind of unflinching nearness that didn't demand anything in return. Then one afternoon, while dusting near the piano, her hand brushed something unexpected on the lid. It was small, simple. A ring. Not gold, not silver. No sparkle or engraving. Just a loop of steel wire, the kind used to hold fence posts steady in high wind. The kind that tethered gates and held ground together. But someone had shaped it, smoothed it, twisted it into something soft where once it had been hard. The edges had been filed until they no longer scratched. It was plain, honest. Ella held it in her hand, heart tightening. There was no note, no tag, no words. Just the ring, and the piano. She slipped it onto her finger. It slid over her knuckle as though it belonged there. That evening, after supper, she stepped outside and found Sam sitting on the porch steps, the light of the dying day casting gold over the fields. He sat as always, boots grounded, forearms resting on his knees, looking not at the sky, but into it. As if waiting not for something to change, but simply willing to witness it if it did. Ella sat beside him. He glanced at her hand. The ring caught the last amber rays of light. He said nothing. But she saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. Neither of them spoke. For a long while they just sat, the hush between them full of things that didn't need to be said. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was low but steady. "I don't need promises," she said. "Not words written down to fade or crack." He turned his head slightly, listening. "I just need you here," she continued. "In the morning. In the evening. That's enough to make this place feel like home." He looked at her then, not just glanced, but truly saw her. For the first time, he didn't look away. His smile was faint, but it was real, full of something deeper than agreement. "Then stay," he said. "That's all I want." The ring of steel glinted between them, silent and strong. It wasn't made for beauty. It was made to hold. Spring arrived like a soft breath across the hills. The frost melted from the fence posts, green shoots pierced the soil, and wildflowers dotted the pasture with color. The colt ran now, strong-legged, quick, his coat glossy in the sun. He followed Ella like a shadow, no longer limping, no longer weak. The ranch had changed. It wasn't just repaired, it was alive. Ella spent her mornings tending to the garden Sam had extended near the porch. In the afternoons, children from town came in pairs and threes, their laughter echoing as she taught them to press their fingers gently on the keys of the old piano. Some learned fast, others fumbled, but they all returned. She called the class "Listen with Your Heart." When the church organized its first spring gathering, they asked Ella to perform. She hesitated at first, unsure of how much of herself she was ready to share. But Sam nodded once when she told him. So she said yes. The church hall was small but full. Neighbors. Friends, Mac with his hat in hand. Children in their Sunday best. Sam stood near the back, leaning quietly against the wall, arms crossed, boots still dusty from the morning chores. Ella stepped to the front, sat at the piano, and took a slow breath. "This piece is called," she said softly, "The Listener Doesn't Have to Understand." She began to play. The melody moved like water, steady, unsure at first, then flowing. It was not loud. It was not proud. But it was honest. There were notes of fear, of memory, of survival. But threaded through it all was something else. Something clear and constant. Trust. Her fingers slowed, then lifted. Silence. She stood, facing the room. "I'm not good with words," she said, voice barely rising above a whisper. "But I found someone who understood me without needing them." She looked toward the back, and found Sam's eyes waiting. She walked down the aisle and into the fading light outside, where the sun stretched low across the dirt path. Sam met her halfway. She took his hand, quiet, firm, and real. He leaned in, his voice barely more than breath. "If you're staying," he said, "I'll plant flowers around every step you take, not to keep you here. Just so you'll always know you were chosen." And in that moment, beneath the open sky, no more needed to be said. Some loves are whispered more than spoken. Some promises are planted, not pledged. And in a world that once tried to burn her voice away, she found a man who listened with his hands, his presence, and his silence. If this story stayed with you, let it linger a little longer. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales where hearts speak louder than guns, and where love, true love, doesn't need to shout to be heard. Because out here on the edge of the world, some of the quietest stories are the ones that echo the longest.